You've probably seen movies where life on a pirate ship looks adventurous, rebellious, even charming. But the reality was far darker. Imagine waking up, not in a bed, but on a plank soaked with sweat, salt, and filth. Surrounded by the snores of dozens of men crammed together, each one fighting for a scrap of space in a foul-smelling hold. The first thing that hits your lungs, I-S-N-T fresh, sea air. But the stench of damp would mixed with vomit, feces, and rats scurrying through the lower deck. This is the awakening on a pirate ship, and it's the moment you would realize you wouldn't survive 24 hours. The space is so tight that standing up means bumping into someone. Privacy doesn't exist. Filthy bodies, covered in sores and lice, share the same heavy, suffocating air. There are no windows, only tiny cracks that let in just enough light to reveal the grotesque reality. You hear deep coughs from sailors with tuberculosis, groans from infected wounds, and the constant creaking of wood under the crew's weight. It feels less like freedom and more like a floating prison. Getting up is only the beginning of the nightmare. Your mouth is already dry, tasting like metal. Fresh water, almost non-existent. Most barrels are spoiled, full of slime and larvae. Many, out of desperation, drink it anyway, knowing diarrhea and fever will follow within hours. The stench of those barrels fills the air, and you realize even thirst can be a death sentence. Relief doesn't exist here. What you wear is another problem. Clothes are always damped, stiff with salt and sweat, clinging to your skin like a second layer of grime. Constant friction creates sores that quickly fester without treatment. Every simple move, like climbing a rope ladder, can reopen cuts that never heal. Pain becomes a permanent companion. Then the shouts come from above. The first mate, demanding everyone to deck. You barely had time to wake, yet you must work immediately. The day starts early, and rest doesn't exist. On deck, the blazing sun reflects off the sea, searing your eyes and skin, draining your energy within minutes. The heat combines with a smell of rotting fish and human sweat. The wind, instead of relief, sprays salt water that cracks your lips and burns open wounds. Discipline is merciless. Any delay or mistake means public punishment. A slap, a kick, or even a blade pressed to your throat reminds you, compassion doesn't exist here. You're not an adventurer seeking treasure. You're a cog in a brutal machine, worth only as long as your body works. Many pirates were captured sailors or desperate men with nothing left to lose. Most hated life at sea, as much as they feared death on the gallows. That mix of fear, hatred, and despair is in every glance around you. Breakfast. Forget romance. If you're lucky, you get ship's biscuit hard lumps infested with worms, which you smash against the wood to shake the insects out before chewing. Often, you swallow them anyway because hunger always wins. The gritty texture, bitter taste, and crunch of sand or crushed bones mixed into the flour remind you, food here is as much an enemy as hunger itself. Some chewed hemp rope or leather scraps to trick their stomachs. Imagine realizing that might be your only option. Every sideways glance could spark a deadly brawl. At any moment, life could end by disease, accident, violence, or simply the sea swallowing the ship whole. Waking each day means facing the certainty that death is close, circling, waiting, and this is just the beginning. If within hours you're already exhausted, hungry, thirsty, and terrified, imagine surviving weeks, months, or even years in this floating prison. On a pirate ship, even waking up is a reminder that your life belongs to the sea and that the end might come much sooner than you think. If rotten food and foul water weren't enough to break you, the next enemy lurking on a pirate ship was invisible, relentless, and everywhere: disease. Life at sea was a slow-motion death sentence, and infection was the executioner. Forget the romantic image of fearless men shouting in the wind. What really filled a pirate vessel was the sound of coughing, groaning, and the scratching of lice-ridden scalps. The ship wasn't a place of freedom, it was a floating prison, where illness was both the guard and the torturer. The most notorious killer was scurvy. Caused by the lack of fresh fruit and vegetables, it didn't simply make you weak. It dismantled your body piece by piece. Your gums swelled until they looked like rotten meat. Teeth loosened and fell out, one by one, leaving your mouth a bleeding cavity. Old scars split open, as if your flesh were unraveling from the inside. Legs swelled grotesquely, joints stiffened, and wounds that might have healed on land festered endlessly on deck. Imagine trying to climb a mast with your bones screaming in pain, your teeth dropping into the bilge water below. For many, scurvy turned the promise of treasure into a slow descent into living rot. But scurvy was just the beginning. Dysentery was a constant plague. Drinking contaminated water or eating spoiled rations meant days of violent diarrhea, leaving men too weak to haul ropes or even stand. The stench of infected latrines seeped into every corner of the lower deck, making it impossible to escape. Imagine lying on your plank, trying to sleep, while the man beside you moaned in agony, soiling himself again and again. Disease didn't just drain the body, it crushed morale, spreading despair faster than the fever itself. Then came smallpox, measles, and typhus diseases that thrived in cramped quarters. One infected sailor could doom the entire crew. Red pustules would erupt across the skin. Eyes would swell shut, and fever would drive men to delirium. On a ship, there was nowhere to quarantine, nowhere to hide. The healthy and the sick shared the same space, breathed the same rancid air, and slept side by side. In a matter of days, dozens could collapse. The ship became a coffin before even reaching battle. Parasites were a daily torment. Fleas and lice nested in filthy clothes, biting relentlessly until the skin was raw. Worms thrived in unwashed intestines, stealing what little nutrition the body tried to absorb. Bedbugs infested hammocks and planks, turning every attempt at rest into another night of scratching, bleeding, and swearing. Rats scurried across bodies as men slept, nibbling at sores and carrying more diseases than anyone could name. Waking up meant counting new bites on your arms and legs and praying that none of them turned septic. Infections were another silent killer. A small cut from a rope, a splinter, or a knife was enough to doom a sailor. With no antiseptics, wounds festered within hours. Red streaks spread up arms. Pus oozed from sores, and fevers rose until delirium set in. Some sailors begged for amputation, but crude saws and no anesthesia meant the operation itself could be deadlier than the infection. The deck often echoed with screams of men having limbs hacked off. While others held them down, the smell of blood and burning pitch used to cauterize wounds mingled with the salty air, turning the ship into a moving charnel house. What made it worse was the hopelessness. There were no real doctors on most pirate ships, only surgeons who were little more than butchers with blades. Their cures included bloodletting, pouring rum into wounds, or applying hot tar to open flesh. Sometimes, the treatment killed faster than the disease. Imagine lying helpless as a crewmate drives a heated knife into your ulcer, telling you it's the only way to save your life. The pain, the smell of burning skin, the screams all part of daily existence in this floating nightmare. And disease didn't just kill individuals. It threatened the entire mission. A sick crew meant slower sails, weaker fighters, and easier defeat in battle. Pirate ships depended on intimidation, but nothing looked less terrifying than a deck full of skeleton-like men coughing up blood. Sometimes, rival ships wouldn't even bother fighting. They'd wait a few weeks, knowing the crew would collapse on their own. The ocean didn't always need cannons to claim its victims. Perhaps the cruelest part was how quickly sickness spread. One man coughing in the hold could infect everyone within days. And in a place where hygiene was non-existent, the odds of survival dropped to almost zero. Water was rationed, not for washing, but for drinking. Clothes stayed filthy for months, caked with sweat, salt, and blood. Hands that cleaned latrines also prepared meals. The cycle of filth was unbreakable, and disease thrived in every drop, every breath, every touch. Imagine yourself there. Fever rising, skin crawling with lice, stomach twisting with cramps, and the sound of rats gnawing beside your ear. Your gums bleed when you try to chew the hard biscuit. Your wounds ooze under your shirt, and you can't stop shaking. Around you, men are coughing, vomiting, and screaming. The air is thick with the smell of rot, sweat, and human waste. There is no relief, no medicine, no escape. The ship isn't taking you toward treasure, it's carrying you deeper into a living hell! This is why you wouldn't last 24 hours on a pirate ship. Food might poison you, water might sicken you, but disease would finish the job. And the worst part? The ocean offered no mercy. There were no hospitals, no safe harbors, only a slow death shared among desperate men trapped in a wooden coffin, adrift on endless waves. If disease didn't kill you on a pirate ship, discipline might. Forget the idea of pirates as carefree rebels living without rules. In reality, pirate life was governed by brutal codes enforced with fear and blood. The ocean was merciless, and so were the men who ruled it. One mistake, one hesitation, even one careless glance could earn you a punishment so savage it made death look like a relief. The most infamous of all was flogging. A sailor tied to the mast, his back bared to the sun, while a whip laced with knots or shards of bone tore his skin open. Each strike left deep red lines that quickly turned to bloody welts. 10 lashes could leave a man crippled. 20 could kill him. The screams carried across the waves a warning to every other crew member. Obey or suffer. And there was no sympathy. Men were forced to watch, knowing that tomorrow it could be them. Then came keelhauling, a punishment so horrifying it bordered on the unthinkable. The condemned was tied with ropes and dragged under the hull of the ship, scraping against barnacles sharp as razors. If the man didn't drown, the barnacles shredded his skin until he emerged on the other side, bleeding and half dead. Survivors carried scars across their bodies for life, grotesque reminders of one mistake too many. Imagine being forced into the black water, lungs burning, knowing the ocean itself might claim you before the rope pulled you back up. But cruelty came in many forms. Sometimes punishment meant being marooned. A sailor accused of betrayal or incompetence was abandoned on a deserted island with nothing but a bottle of water, or sometimes not even that. Death came slowly, through starvation, thirst, or madness under the relentless sun. The crew would watch the shore grow smaller in the distance, knowing they'd left a man to rot alone. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. There was also the iron discipline of confinement. On some ships, offenders were locked in the bilge the lowest, foulest part of the vessel. Imagine crouching in total darkness, knee-deep in stagnant water, mixed with urine, excrement, and dead rats. Air so foul you could barely breathe, heat so suffocating it felt like drowning on dry land. Hours in the bilge broke even the strongest men, driving them to delirium. By the time they were released, many begged for death, rather than face it again. And punishments weren't always official. Fights broke out constantly among the crew, and the strongest imposed their own justice. A stolen ration, an insult, or a suspected betrayal could end with a knife in the ribs or a man being tossed overboard. Pirate captains encouraged this atmosphere of fear. It kept the crew sharp, paranoid, and obedient. Violence wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. The deck itself seemed soaked with old grudges and fresh blood. The executions were perhaps the cruelest spectacle of all. A sailor accused of mutiny or treason might be hanged from the yarm, his body swaying as the ship cut through the waves. Sometimes the captain preferred a more creative end, tying weights to the victim's legs and throwing him into the sea, letting the sharks finish what the rope began. Every death was a performance, staged to remind the living that no one was safe. Psychological torture played its part too. Captains loved to humiliate men before punishing them, forcing them to kneel, to beg, to confess crimes they never committed. Some were mocked, dressed in rags, paraded before the crew before the final blow. Others were told they would be spared, only to be executed minutes later. Hope itself became a weapon, dangled before desperate eyes and ripped away. The paranoia of pirate life made discipline even more terrifying. You never knew what might trigger it. Refuse an order, spill a barrel of water, or even look at the captain the wrong way, and you might find yourself chained, whipped, or worse. Every sailor lived in constant tension, waiting for the moment the spotlight of cruelty would turn on him. That fear kept the ship running, but it also broke men faster than hunger or disease. Imagine standing in line, watching as a crewmate is dragged across the deck, tied down, and beaten until his screams fade into silence. The salt air stings his wounds, flies swarm to his blood, and the captain turns to you with a warning glare. In that moment, you know your survival depends not just on your strength, but on your ability to submit completely. One wrong move, and the next body swinging from the ropes could be yours. This is why you wouldn't survive 24 hours on a pirate ship. Not because of cannons, or storms, or rival navies, but because the men beside you were as dangerous as any enemy. Discipline wasn't about order. It was about fear, control, and domination. In a world where mercy was weakness, punishment was the only language that kept the crew in line. And for you, a stranger thrown into that nightmare, it would be only a matter of time before the whip, the rope, or the sea claimed your body as the next warning to the rest. If storms and cannons weren't enough to terrify you, the real danger on a pirate ship often came from within. Life at sea was a constant test of loyalty, and betrayal lurked in every glance, every whisper, every stolen ration. Imagine living trapped in a wooden coffin with men who were starving, sick, drunk, and desperate men who knew that survival meant seizing every chance, even if it meant stabbing their own crewmates in the dark. On a pirate ship, trust didn't exist. Paranoia was the only thing that kept you alive. Every man was armed, and every man was a potential threat. Knives tucked into belts, pistols hidden in boots, cutlasses hanging at the hip. A simple argument over food or a lost card game could turn into bloodshed within seconds. Imagine sleeping in the lower deck, surrounded by men muttering in the dark, clutching your blade tightly because your warranty, sure if you do wake up with it still in your hand or in your chest. The ocean outside was vast, but the real battlefield was only a few feet away, in the suffocating space where you slept and ate. Pirate codes promised equality and shared spoils, but greed always poisoned the crew. Gold, jewels, and rum fueled envy. Men plotted to hide treasure, to cheat others of their share, or to overthrow captains who they thought kept too much for themselves. Whispered conspiracies filled the air, growing louder with every hardship. One day you fought beside your brothers. The next day they dragged you to the mast, accusing you of betrayal. Whether guilty or innocent didn't matter. Suspicion alone was enough to kill. Alcohol made it worse. Rum flowed freely, and with it came rage. Drunken sailors lashed out at imagined insults, starting fights that ended with corpses tossed overboard. The ship rocked not only with waves, but with the weight of constant brawls. Broken jaws, slit throats. Cracked skulls. These weren't rare accidents, but daily risks of sharing space with men whose tempers were sharper than their blades. And the captain, he often encouraged it. A crew at each other's throats was too busy to plot against him. Spies were everywhere. Some men sold information to the captain, betraying their shipmates in exchange for favors or an extra ration. Others acted as double agents, feeding lies to create chaos. You never knew who was listening, who would twist your words, who would accuse you of mutiny just to save themselves. Imagine speaking in confidence to a friend, only to see him report your words hours later, and the next thing you know, you're bound in chains, staring at the sea, waiting for the punishment you can't escape. Mutiny was the shadow haunting every voyage. Captains who were too cruel or too greedy knew the crew might rise against them. But mutiny wasn't clean or heroic. It was messy, bloody, and brutal. Men turned on each other in the dead of night, axes splitting skulls, pistols firing in the smoke-filled deck. If the mutiny failed, the survivors were executed on the spot. If it succeeded, new leaders often proved as tyrannical as the old. Nothing changed except the faces of the men giving the orders. Even survival was a competition. When supplies ran low, pirates fought over the smallest scraps. A sip of water, a chunk of biscuit, a strip of dried meat could spark violence. Some sailors hoarded secretly, hiding food in clothing or crates, while others hunted for thieves, waiting to expose them. Discovery meant savage beatings, or even death. Hunger made every man suspicious, every glance a potential accusation. The ship was less a crew than a cage of starving wolves. And then came the betrayals that defined pirate life. Crews sometimes sold each other out to authorities, trading companions for a pardon. A man who called you brother one day might hand you over to hang at the gallows the next. Betrayal wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The line between pirate and trader was as thin as the rope that eventually swung from the yardarm. Living under such paranoia destroyed the mind as much as the body. Imagine lying awake, heart pounding, listening to footsteps above you, wondering if they were moving supplies or moving closer with a knife. Every laugh could be mocking, every silence a trap. The weight of constant suspicion pressed down harder than the sea itself. You weren't just fighting enemies on the horizon. You were fighting enemies in your own shadow. This is why you wouldn't survive 24 hours on a pirate ship. Not because of hunger, not because of disease, not even because of brutal punishments, but because the men beside you were never truly allies. They were rivals, predators, and opportunists waiting for the moment you slipped. In that world, loyalty was a myth, and betrayal was the only truth you could count on. The enemy wasn't across the water, it was already at your side, watching, waiting, and smiling as it sharpened the knife meant for your back. If hunger, disease, punishment, and betrayal hadn't broken you already, the sea itself would finish the job. The ocean wasn't just a backdrop to pirate life, it was the ultimate executioner, striking with storms, cannon fire, and waves that swallowed ships whole. Survival on a pirate vessel wasn't measured in years or even months. Sometimes, all it took was a single storm or a single battle to end hundreds of lives in one violent instant. Storms were the constant nightmare. Imagine standing on deck as black clouds gather, winds screaming like demons, waves rising higher than the masts. The ship tilts violently, the deck slick with salt water and blood from men thrown against the railings. Ropes snap like gunshots, sails tear apart, and the mast groans under the weight of forces too powerful for human hands to control. You cling to wood splintering under your fingers, rain blinding your eyes, as icy waves crash over your body again and again. In minutes, you're soaked, freezing, and one misstep away from being swept into the abyss. No one will dive in to save you in a storm. Man overboard meant man forgotten. And if nature didn't claim you, battle would. Pirate ships lived and died by the cannon. When a target appeared on the horizon, adrenaline surged through the crew. But so did terror. Cannons roared, wood exploded into splinters, sharp enough to cut a man in half, and iron balls smashed through bodies like paper. Smoke choked the air, fire licked the rigging, and screams rose above the thunder of gunfire. Men with shattered limbs writhed on deck, trampled by their comrades still trying to fight. Gunpowder filled the air, burning throats and lungs, while musket balls whistled like wasps, striking without mercy. Boarding was even worse. Pirates prided themselves on close combat, but the reality was a nightmare of steel and blood. Grappling hooks clanged onto enemy rails, and men surged forward with cutlasses, pistols, and axes. The deck became a slaughterhouse, slippery with gore, echoing with cries of rage and agony. Imagine trying to stand your ground while surrounded by chaos, blades flashing, muskets exploding inches from your ears. The smell of sweat, blood, and smoke mixed with the salt air, until it was impossible to tell if you were breathing in the sea or death itself. And yet, death often came not by blade or bullet, but by drowning. The ocean was merciless, dragging men into its depths without hesitation. A single cannonball striking below deck could rip the hull wide open, water flooding in faster than buckets could throw it out. In minutes, the ship became a trap, men scrambling up ladders as seawater swallowed the lower decks. Those who couldn't swim, most sailors of the age, couldn't sink immediately, their screams cut off by the black water. Others clung to floating debris, only to be dragged under by the weight of their own soaked clothes and boots. Sharks, drawn by the chaos, circled beneath, waiting for the inevitable feast. Even victories brought drowning. Ships set ablaze during battle forced men to choose between fire and water, leaping into the sea only to vanish under crashing waves. Imagine watching comrades flail desperately, their heads bobbing once, twice, then disappearing forever. Survivors knew the truth. If the sea didn't kill you outright, thirst, exposure, and madness would, floating for hours under a merciless sun, lips cracked, tongues swelling, skin blistering. You'd beg for death long before rescue came. The terror wasn't just in the water or the enemy, it was in the certainty. Every sailor knew that drowning was his likely fate. Men joked bitterly about feeding the fish, but deep down, each one carried the fear that the ocean would be their grave. Coffins weren't needed. The sea swallowed bodies whole, leaving nothing but memory and legend. This is the conclusion of your 24 hours. From the moment you awoke in the suffocating stench below deck, you were already doomed. You endured rotten food, crawling with vermin, water that poisoned you, diseases that rotted you alive, punishments that broke your body, and betrayals that shattered your trust. And now, in the end, the ocean itself takes you. Whether by storm, by cannon, or by drowning, your final breath is lost to the waves. The pirate's life wasn't freedom. It was a sentence. A sentence to hunger, pain, violence, paranoia, and finally, oblivion beneath the sea. You wouldn't survive 24 hours, not because you were weak, but because no one could. Even the strongest men were broken by it. And yet, they kept sailing, because the alternative was the gallows. So remember this. The romantic image of pirates as adventurous rogues is a lie. The truth is darker. The sea claimed them, the ship destroyed them, and history forgot them. And if you stepped onto that deck just once, you'd be gone before the day was done swallowed by a world where the only certainty was death.